Hi everybody, welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. In this video, I want to summarize why I think the second coming is sooner than later. I'm not one that likes to predict things. I don't like timelines, trying to predict the future, but I do have a general sense that the second coming is going to happen sooner than later. And I think you can base it on three things. The first thing is just simply the plain words of the prophets and the apostles and the general authorities and general officers of the church. Number two, discerning the signs of the times. This entire channel has been an effort to try and capture all these unusual things that we've seen, unprecedented things, record-breaking things. I have timelines of the past of things that actually have happened that are verifiable, and I've tried to look at the big picture, and we're going to discuss some of that. And then lastly, prophecies. But that one is a lot more difficult, I think, because a prophecy may be fulfilled and it's obvious, or it may not. One of the big problems when Christ came the first time was many of the Jews didn't accept him because they had preconceived notions of what that prophecy was supposed to look like, the prophecy of the Messiah. And so they stuck to their own understanding of the scriptures and their theories. They looked beyond the mark, and he came, and they were doing a lot more thinking than they were feeling, and they missed it. I think a lot of them were hard in their hearts. They were prideful, and they thought they had it all figured out. I don't want to make that same mistake. So if there's a prophecy that may have to happen in a certain way before the second coming, if that's how it happens, then fine. But I'm perfectly content with just the second coming happening and then looking back with 2020 hindsight and understanding, oh, that's what that actually meant. That's how it actually played out. I thought it was going to be more like this, but it turned out to be more like that, something completely opposite of what I thought. So the words of the prophets, discerning the signs of the times, and then prophecies. So I'm going to break it down. So we're going to talk about the plain words of the prophets. In my mind, I look a lot at President Ezra Taft Benson because I feel like in more recent times, so basically around the 80s until now, I feel like he was the first one to really kind of get the ball rolling as far as having us believe that it's going to be soon. He's the one that said to these college students, make no mistake about it, you are a marked generation. You are the ones that must prepare to meet your God. And a lot of people were affected by that. It's pretty clear. You could say, well, he's just talking about the youth in general, whether it's you guys or whether it's the next generation. I don't think so. I don't. I've put together a spreadsheet looking at rising generation quotes, and you don't really find any until the 60s. So if there's anything from before, it's much more general. It's not talking to a specific generation. It's just talking about the church rising in general. But it's not until the 60s that you have speakers talking to a specific generation and making it seem like they are the ones that will witness the second coming. With President Nelson, before he became president of the church, in 2016, when he was president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, he did something very similar. He was talking to college students, just like with President Benson. I don't know if it was college students or if it was young adults, but with President Nelson, he was talking to college age people. It was a BYU Idaho devotional, or a devotional from BYU Idaho, Hawaii. And in speaking to the millennials, he said, make no mistake about it, you were born to be true millennials. And he said it in the context of the second coming and the millennium, the 1,000-year period that starts with the second coming. And then we have President Benson, we have President Hinckley. Not that I remember any really powerful second coming quotes from him, but he did really point out the signs of the times, notably October 2001, the month after that tragedy happened. He gave that very first General Conference talk after that happened, and he declared that prophecy was fulfilled. Joel chapter 2, verses 28 to 32. Um, that's one of the scriptures that Moroni told Joseph Smith had not yet been fulfilled. When Moroni was visiting Joseph Smith in his home when he was still young after the first vision, he quoted that scripture, and then President Hinckley said that it had been fulfilled. And it seems, I would assume, that the complete fulfillment of it, or the main fulfillment, had to do with what happened the month before. That's just my opinion, but that's what happened. That happened in September, and then President Hinckley spoke in October and said that that prophecy was fulfilled. So with President Hinckley, there were things like that, things that he said as well as things that he did. He was the president of the church when we went from 1999 to the year 2000, and I have a whole spreadsheet for all these special things that happened in and around the year 2000. And then, of course, we have President Nelson. We already have some good Second Coming quotes from him from before he became president of the church, but when he became president of the church, it went into overdrive. From beginning to end, he continually spoke about the Second Coming, and we got some really incredible Second Coming quotes from him. From President Benson, he was the first one, as far as I know, that used the analogy of being in the final inning. Well, with President Nelson in 2022, he said that we're in the last half of the ninth inning. President Nelson said to the youth of the church that this is the final phase, and that was repeated a number of times by others in church leadership. In 2019, he said that time is running out. And then on top of everything that he said, we also have a lot of really interesting quotes, very explicit quotes from members of the First Presidency, the Quorum of the 12, and the other general officers and general authorities and general officers of the church. We have a whole category of quotes that I have felt could be considered final phase quotes. One of the more recent ones comes from President Eyring. This was just a couple days after President Oaks became president of the church. He said that these are the final preparations for the second coming. Just like that. Plain, clear, easy to understand. The final preparations before the second coming. In the 2026 BYU Women's Conference, Tamara Runya, she reminded all of us about President Nelson's time is running out from 2019. And we have so many other quotes that talk about us being in the final minutes. This is the end of the game is on the line, so on and so forth. The final battle, stuff like that. They've made it very clear. If you have a testimony that these are the Lord's prophets and apostles and the ones that he has chosen to lead his church, then I think you have to take it seriously and understand that they're saying it for a reason, and it's not just their opinion. They're being inspired to say these things. And then with President Nelson, you had his big Second Coming Ensign and Liahona article in the April 2020 Ensign and Liahona. Happened in the year 2020. We all know that that was a crazy year, and that was a really special general conference. President Nelson said that it was a hinge point in the history of the church, and we did a lot of really interesting and special things with that general conference. But the Ensign and Liahona issue of that month was President Nelson's big Second Coming article. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it was something like The Future of the Church and Preparing for the Second Coming, right? And then in 2024, this was his second to last talk as president of the church. He gave his big Second Coming General Conference talk. And again, I can't remember the exact name. I think it's The Lord Jesus Christ Will Return Again. And that was an incredibly interesting talk. It turns out that it had a chiasmus structure to it, where you have things that repeat, like there's something at the beginning, then something at the end, and then you have another thing at the beginning and another thing at the end, and it like points toward the center. I did a video about that one time. There were a lot of interesting things about that talk. Um, but it's like if you just listen to what they're saying and then you feel and you pray about it, this alone should give you the sense that it's soon. If you believe that the Lord really is guiding his church and he works through church leadership, especially the prophet. There's just too much when you put it all together, and you don't see the same thing when you go back in time. Believe me, I'm working at this full time, trying to capture every second coming, everything from any decade, going back to Joseph Smith. I, I promise you, there has not been this much second coming talk, and it has not been this explicit in terms of the timing of the second coming. And then we've also had a lot of talk about different things in the church preparing for the second coming, stuff that I have never really associated with preparation for the second coming until the last few years, such as BYU in higher education and seminaries and institutes. I have a number of quotes that specifically link those things with preparing for the second coming. I don't have any other quotes from before, say, I don't know when, but like these have all been within the last like maybe 3 or 4 years. And I don't think I have any from before that. Um, I have quotes to talk about the fact that the new hymn book that's coming out is related to the second coming. It's helping to hasten the work and prepare for the second coming. Even the giving machines. The red giving machines at Christmas time? I have quotes talking about the fact that that is helping to prepare for the second coming. Um, and there's a whole bunch of other topics, right? So there's been like not only very explicit quotes talking about like this is the final phase and time is running out, but then the variety of topics that are being associated with the second coming. It's really quite astounding and it's unprecedented. You cannot find another time in the history of the church that is like this. Okay. And then more recently, before we move on to talking about signs of the times, we're still talking about the words of the prophets in church leadership. More recently, we've had President Oaks become president of the church. He has said a couple things about the second coming, but it's been a little bit more muted or more subtle from him. Not from everybody else necessarily, but from him, yes. But the one really interesting thing that's happened over the last few years, and especially since he became president of the church, is this emphasis on the parable of the 10 virgins. I didn't realize until February of this year when Elder Anderson said it that there had been so much repetition about the parable of the 10 virgins. We had that statue that was installed on Temple Square of the 5 wise virgins before the April 2025 General Conference, in which there were 3 speakers that talked about the parable of the 10 virgins, including President Oaks himself. If you go back in time, all the way back to 2004, when President Oaks gave his big second coming talk in General Conference, he's the one that's repeated it the most, at least what I have so far on my spreadsheet. He is the one that has talked about the parable of the 10 virgins the most. So I think there's something to that. Call me crazy, but that's what Elder Anderson thinks too. Okay, so I feel like that's all that you really need if you're just paying attention. You watch General Conference, you read the church magazines, you read church news and newsroom articles. It should be pretty clear. But then you can move on to this next topic of this video, which is signs of the times and discerning the signs of the times. I've said before, I'm not sure if my channel really would have been possible back in the 2010s or even the 2000s. I mean, around the turn of the millennium, there were things going on. We had a couple wars that kicked off and crazy events. But things kind of like died down. Not saying that there wasn't an increase in like division in society and an increase in worldliness and sin. Things have been slowly heating up. There have been notable disasters during that time, but nothing. It doesn't compare to what we've seen since I've started my channel. Well, let's say just since President Nelson became president of the church in 2018. I started my channel in 2021. So if I had tried to do a channel back then, it probably would have been more difficult and there may not have been as much to talk about. Neither Second Coming quotes nor Signs of the Times. It would have been a much different channel. But in this day and age, it's very easy to do. It's very easy to do a channel like this because there's so much to talk about. So as far as signs goes, we can look at the church and how the church is accelerating in all arenas. Church leadership continues to talk about how the hastening has happened across all areas of the church. That is also something that you cannot find when you go back in time. Growing up as a member of the church, whenever someone was talking about the hastening, they would typically be talking about missionary work. Maybe sometimes they'd be talking about the number of temples, especially during President Hinckley's time. Maybe with family history, but not all these other topics like what we were talking about earlier. There have been major changes to the church. And a lot of them, when you look at a lot of them, it becomes clear that the church is preparing to become a global church and to prepare for the second coming as well. So we have the number of temples. We had that big spike during President Hinckley's time, but an even bigger spike with President Nelson. He passed up President Hinckley in terms of the total number of temples that have been announced, and he has directly associated it with preparing a people who will help prepare the world for the second coming. He has tied the number of temples to the second coming. So that's pretty exciting. We have had record growth in terms of the total number of new converts within a 12-month period. Well, actually just all of 2025. But even before 2025, Elder Cook had talked about how, from like May of 2024 to May of 2025, that was the largest number of new converts in the history of the church. And then that was exceeded by just all of 2025. And for all we know, maybe 2026 is also going to be a record-breaking year. But there has been major growth in the church. And from what they've said, I think they've said that there's been like a 20% increase in new converts in all areas of the church. And in fact, the area that's growing the quickest, the last I heard, the area that's growing the quickest is Europe, of all places. And then, of all places, North America is behind with only 17%, but it is still up 17%. It's not that far away from 20%. 2020, the whole year 2020 was a big sign to a lot of people, both inside and outside of the church. Many Second Coming YouTube channels and podcasts started because of 2020. That was a pivotal year. It was the year of the pandemic, as the pandemic was starting to enter the United States. And as the renovation of the Salt Lake Temple began, there was an earthquake in the Salt Lake Valley in Magna, which caused the trumpet of the angel Moroni of the Salt Lake Temple, the flagship temple, the temple that represents church headquarters. That temple's angel Moroni dropped his trumpet in 2020 as all this was beginning. The renovations and the pandemic. All temples worldwide were shut down. Missionary work was hindered. Missionaries came home from overseas. And then we had, around that same time, the April 2020 General Conference, the 200-year anniversary of the first vision. There was a solemn assembly, and it wasn't a solemn assembly for a new president of the church. It was commemorating a special occasion, the anniversary of the first vision. A new church symbol was introduced. It was really something else. We got a new proclamation. Only the 6th in church history, there's been 6 official proclamations, and I'm guessing that there's going to be a 7th during the bicentennial of the establishment of the church, but we'll see. Um, we've seen even more political division, especially with Trump. So this would go before 2020 with his first term. The way that I've perceived things in my life, I feel like, there was division back in the 80s and maybe even more in the 90s. But then after the Afghanistan war and especially the Iraq war, the division just went into overdrive. And there's been this like hyper polarization, and it reached a new level when Trump became president of the United States. And it just feels like it continues to get wider and wider, and people continue to lose their minds more and more. We've had a lot of wars that have been unusual within recent years. You go back to the 80s, you go back to the 90s, and there were wars, but it was generally a time of peace. You had the downfall of the Soviet Union. You had Desert Storm, but like it feels like in my mind, the 90s felt kind of like a time of peace and prosperity, and I felt like there was a lot of optimism going into the new millennium. Um, it felt like the era of like really big wars, World War One, World War Two, and then things like the Cold War had basically come to an end. Um, but, but then we entered into the new millennium and we had those 2 wars. But more recently, we've had a couple wars that I never thought that we would see. We have this war is still ongoing between Russia and Ukraine, the largest land war in Europe since World War II, still unresolved. I have no idea how it's going to end, but I can't believe that it's even happening because I still to this day I'm kind of still in that 90s frame of mind where it's like it felt like that's something from the past, from World War One and World War Two. It was unimaginable to me that there would be another big land war in Europe, especially between Russia and Ukraine. They used to be the same, the Soviet Union. Um, so that's been kind of unreal, and I don't know where it's headed, but it's caused a lot of strife. And then we have what I believe it has been Israel's 4th existential war. Their first one was the War of Independence. The second one, okay, let me get this straight. The second one was the 6-Day War. The next one after that was the Yom Kippur War. And then almost exactly 50 years later to the day, it's just like 50 years in one day. That's when this most recent war started. With the October 7th attacks. And although the main focus of that war was Gaza, it spilled out into other arenas. They described it as a 7-front war because you had Gaza, you had Yemen, you had the West Bank, you had Hezbollah, you had the militias in Iraq and Syria, and then finally you have Iran itself. And although the current war plus ceasefire in Iran is technically a separate war, in my mind, they're very much connected. The war that started on October 7th, 2023, and what's happening in Iran right now. So in my mind, it's still unresolved and has the greatest potential to lead to the actual battles of Armageddon and the siege on Jerusalem. But we'll just have to see how it plays out. I have a hard time actually seeing how that would happen, but there may be some random way that we're not thinking of that it could happen. I don't know. So unusual wars. We've also seen things with like Venezuela. There's talk about Cuba. There's been this thing with Greenland. There's just been a lot of really unusual things. Okay. And then by way of natural disasters, we've had crazy volcanic eruptions, especially the one in 2022 off the coast of Tonga. It was an underwater volcano that produced the largest explosion seen on planet Earth at least observed with modern instruments. So maybe not of all time, but with modern science and instruments, the largest of all time, even bigger than the largest nuclear bomb. That's how big it was. So we had that, and President Nelson alluded to it in the next general conference after that happened. We've seen crazy tsunamis, notably in 2011 and 2004, but there have been other tsunamis since that time, including with that volcanic eruption off the coast of Tonga. We've seen crazy earthquakes, notably the 2004 Indonesia earthquake and tsunami that killed over 200,000 people. And then the one that happened in Haiti in 2010 that also killed over 200,000 people. We also had the one, oh gosh, I think it was 2023, like at the beginning of 2023, maybe 2024, where there's a really powerful earthquake in southern Turkey and it affected Syria as well, which literally split an olive grove that was on like a mount, like something that looked like the Mount of Olives. It was like Turkey's version of the Mount of Olives, literally split in two, and there was a huge chasm that was formed due to that earthquake. And this is like directly north of Israel. I feel like it was a, a type of things to come, a foreshadowing. Wildfires. Wildfires have been crazy. They've been crazy since 2004, ever since President Oaks gave that Second Coming talk in General Conference. We've seen record-breaking wildfires, the largest or deadliest or most destructive, especially in 2023. We've recently seen Canada's worst wildfire season, Russia's worst wildfire season, the European Union's worst wildfire season, which is big because these are big countries. It's hard to outdo that. Once you reach, your largest wildfire season, it's a lot of area. I think it's more unlikely to achieve that again. So we've seen a lot of crazy wildfires. We saw Lahaina, of all places. I never thought that we would see a crazy fire like we saw in Lahaina, Hawaii. We also had the Paradise, California fire. That's the one that was included in President Nelson's talk, where he said that time is running out. After he got done talking about Paradise, California, showed pictures from that event, a burnt down city, people wondering, where's my family? Because something similar is probably going to happen with the Second Coming when the wicked are destroyed. The wicked aren't just these like imaginary people that aren't in your, city, your neighborhood, or even your family or group of friends. We are all friends with who are going to be considered the wicked. It's if you're living a telestial lifestyle. We all have them in our our circles of friends and our families. So we want to be living righteously so that we can continue with them into the millennium and then ultimately into the eternities in the celestial kingdom. Hurricanes. We have seen some record-breaking hurricanes, notably, I think it was Hurricane Melissa that hit Jamaica. It was the strongest hurricane to make landfall in the Atlantic. We also saw, hurricanes and typhoons and cyclones are all the same thing. I think it was Typhoon or Cyclone Freddy. I think it was Typhoon Freddy. That was in the Indian Ocean. I can't remember. I think it was 2024, but it was like the longest track and longest lasting hurricane ever recorded. I can't remember how many days, but it was like on the record, it was the longest. It lasted for a really long time. It eventually made its way from basically the area of Australia all the way across the Indian Ocean to Africa. In effect, it affected, I think, among other countries, Mozambique. And then in space, we have seen the largest explosions ever seen. After President Nelson said in October 2022 that we would see the greatest manifestations of the Lord's power that we've ever seen, which I feel like it mostly has reference to like the temples that are being built, missionary work, and all the things that the church is doing. I think that's the main thing that is meant by that, but I think it can also include things like this. 7 days after he said that, there was a gamma ray burst. It's the largest explosion that we have ever recorded with modern instruments. So it wasn't on Earth. If it was on Earth, we'd be obliterated. But this was, far away, some other star system. The largest explosion we've ever seen. 7 days after President Nelson said that. And then there's been all these other events after he said that, such as the largest solar flare that we've ever seen. Not from our sun, but it was another star system, I think in the Orion constellation. I'm not going to list the other ones, but there's like something like 5 to 7 other largest and most powerful and brightest things that we've ever seen in space. That's just since 2022. We're now in 2026. It's a very small window of time. We've had these incredible aurora displays. Right now, I have to double check. I don't know if we've reached solar maximum or if we're already past it. It mostly has to do with that. But there have been 3 times in the United States that the aurora has been visible all the way down to, beyond the United States, down to Mexico. So Texas and Arizona, Mexico, Southern California could all see these auroras as long as the weather permitted, and as long as the clouds weren't in the way. But that's something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. I always thought if I was going to see the aurora, it'd be because I'd go to like someplace like Norway or Canada or Alaska, which I never planned to do. But the first 2 times I saw it in South Central Kansas on the border of Kansas and Oklahoma. That blew my mind. And then I moved to Independence, Missouri last year. And on November 11th, it happened again. And I got amazing photos and videos of the aurora from the temple lot. So I'd never seen that in my life. And then all of a sudden, within just the last couple of years, I see it 3 times. And so did many other people. It's very unusual. And the last one that happened, guess what? It happened exactly between the death dates of President Nelson and President Holland. They both passed away on the 27th. President Nelson, the 27th of September. President Holland, the 27th of December. And right in the middle, the night of November 11th, in the morning of November 12th, those are the 2 days that the aurora event straddled. And then we've had, of course, the eclipses, the Great American Eclipses. The one in 2017, it was on President Monson's 90th birthday. Elder Stevenson brought that fact up in the next General Conference. The path of totality went over perfectly all the historic church sites here in Missouri. Adamonte-Yaman, Far West, Hans Mill, Liberty Jail, the Independence sites, and then all the other smaller ones that most people don't know about. The only one that it didn't go over was one that's in South Kansas City, but all the rest of them, the path of totality perfectly went over all of them. Okay, this was a couple months before President Nelson became president of the church. 7 days after October 7th, 2023, it wasn't a great American eclipse. It wasn't even a total solar eclipse. It was an annular solar eclipse. But there was one that went through the state of Utah. You know that there's a lot of temples in Utah. Well, guess what? It took the one path that it would have to take to miss all the temples, except for one. The only temple that was in operation at that time was the Monticello, Utah temple. It didn't miss that one, but it took the very, very unlikely path that would have it miss all the temples. Happened 7 days after the October 7th attacks and 14 days after General Conference. And this was exactly 2 years before President Oaks became president of the church. President Oaks becoming the president of the church was the 2-year anniversary of that annular solar eclipse. You can't tell me that's coincidence. And then in 2024, the church purchased the Kirtland Temple on March 5th of 2024. The next month, we have General Conference, and the day after General Conference, there's the second Great American Solar Eclipse. It was a total solar eclipse. The path of totality went over the Sacred Grove, Fayette, New York, where the church was established, other historic sites in New York, and it went over the Kirtland, Ohio, well, the Kirtland Temple in Ohio. So, in my mind, these three eclipses were very, very specific signs to our church, although there were many other spiritual people and Christians that felt that there was something special to them. So, the last thing, as by way of signs, is we have artificial intelligence. I have a number of quotes that talk about the fact that technology itself is a sign of the times, whether it's the radio, the internet, airplanes, and so forth. Artificial intelligence, I feel like, is just like the internet. When the internet first came out, it was very limited. There wasn't a whole lot you could do. There were all sorts of funky websites, and I mean, it was just kind of silly. But over time, it got more and more serious and more integrated into our lives. Now I'm here on the internet doing these podcast episodes. And I don't know that we've even realized the full potential of the internet, but artificial intelligence is like a new internet. It's a new thing that's developing, and I don't think that we've realized the full potential of artificial intelligence at all. We're just like in the very, very beginning stages of using it, and it could be very, very profound. It could be very, very dangerous. It may be very threatening to the church. It may be very threatening to humanity. I don't know. But these two things, the plain words of the prophets and the signs of the times, which I can't cover all of it in just one video. This is just a basic summary. That by itself makes me believe that the second coming is sooner than it is later. Now, this brings us to the last part of the video, prophecies. Okay, look, I said before that I believe that prophecies are important. I know that they're real, but we have to be careful because we may have preconceptions of what is supposed to happen, what it's supposed to look like, who it's supposed to involve, whether it's supposed to happen before the second coming or after the second coming or at the time of the second coming. Elder Bruce R. McConkie in The Millennial Messiah said, "It may not be possible for us to put everything in its proper time frame because it hasn't been revealed. It may seem like it's clear, but there may be a partial fulfillment before the second coming and then a complete fulfillment after the second coming." So I try and take note of what has been said by authorized voices, by the Lord's prophets and apostles. And then I sometimes think, well, I could see it happening like this. I could see it happening like that. I could see it happening like that. And then just leave it alone. So if I'm wrong, for example, about the 10 lost tribes, I don't think that they're in a main group. I don't think that there's a hidden group of humans in space, inside the earth, underneath an ice cap. I don't think that. And it's based on what modern day prophets have said in more recent times. But if I'm wrong, if they're wrong, and the 10 lost tribes come, then that's going to be an even further indication that we're closer to the second coming. So I'll be happy if they suddenly come in spaceships and I'll be like, oh my gosh, we are like really close. This is crazy. Same thing with Adam-on-Diamond. Based on the quotes that I've collected, I think I have 4 of them that talk about the fact that the entire church is not going to go to Adam-on-Diamond. It could happen in other ways. It could be that General Conference could be part of Adam-on-Diamond. There could be special broadcasts, similar to some of these temple dedications that you may participate in. I don't know how it's going to happen. I don't know if it's like something that happens over years. I don't know if like the final meeting happens when we're translated, quickened, caught up, raptured, so to speak, at the time of the second coming. That could constitute the final meeting of Adam-on-Diamond, where we actually go there in a supernatural way. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if it's already started. The 144,000, the church has said recently that most likely that prophecy has reference to the work that's being done in temples. And I do tend to think that it's along those lines. But if all of a sudden that turns out to be wrong, and there's literally 144,000 high priests that are like not married, they're virgins, then so be it. And we'll take note of it and be like, wow, okay, so that's been fulfilled. Same thing with the building of the actual city of New Jerusalem. Same thing with the building of the New Jerusalem Temple here in Independence, Missouri. We've talked about the Independence Visitor Center, how it's built to be part of the 24 Temple complex, but maybe tomorrow the church will announce that it has purchased the temple lot that's currently owned by Church of Christ, and then they'll announce plans to build the temple. So same thing with the temple in Jerusalem, same thing with a lot of things. So I take note of the prophecies, and if some of these things happen in the classic view of them in that type of way, then great. Then we'll know that we're just that much closer to the second coming. So overall, this is why I think that we're close to the second coming. But the best thing that we can do is make sure that we're working on ourselves, that we're watching ourselves, making sure that we're repenting, making sure that we're keeping the commandments, making sure that we're on the covenant path, that we have a temple recommend, not only that we're worthy to have a temple recommend, but we actually have it and it's active and that we use it. We need to be prepared. We need to be the wise virgins when Christ comes. We need to have our own testimonies. We have to have our own experiences. We need to do the necessary work to work out our own salvation for when he comes. So that's what we should focus on, but we should watch these things. We should listen to the prophets. We should watch for the signs of the times and observe, but we need to just be satisfied with being with I don't know. Being able to say, I don't know. I do know that this, and this has happened. It seems like it's leading up to the second coming soon, but I don't know. Let's just wait and see how it goes. All right, well, that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.